Buongiorno a tutti e benvenuti a...
Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the fourth and last meeting of the cycle Cosa ridesta l'umano. This is a section devoted to witnesses. The Rimini meeting has always offered its audience the opportunity to meet witnesses. That is, people who, thanks to their work, tell the story or the history of a different life. We have two U.S. guests, both converted to Roman Catholicism. One used to be a Jew, and the second used to be a Sikh. They have some common features. I mean, they come from Boston and New York, and they have met friends of the newly formed communities of CL. After the 80s, the movement was not simply transplanted from Italy. It was doing something that the Christendom did when entering the Roman world in the past. So it got disseminated there by giving rise to a new civilization. We've had the privilege to meet them and to stay with them for many years now. And I would like to tell you what I learned from them. I learned what they have experienced when meeting their first Christian friends. For them, faith is shedding a new light on everything. These are friends who really radically change your life. I mean, you can make mistakes with these friends because you're sure that you will be supported and corrected by them. And you can draw energy by the relationship with a presence. So a great mistake can be the occasion or the opportunity for a new start. They have been involved with a faith, not to evangelize the religion. That was experiencing an encounter which has become the starting point of the things they wished for their lives. So they thought there was no separation between living and faith, faith and work, and so on. Müller used a statement which Don Giussani loved very much. I could no longer live if I not able to hear him again. It's a pleasure to introduce Jonathan Fields, musician, composer, very well known to the friends of the Rimini meeting for the events he presented over the years, and for the many meetings, the Guida all'Ascolto, and member of the regiment, and Anujeet Sareen, analyst of a great company based in Boston. Please welcome our friends by tributing an applause.
A loro chiediamo di...
So we asked them to tell us the way they experienced their faith. Jonathan.
Grazie, Letizia. That is the extent of my Italian. Sorry. I was surprised by this invitation to tell the story of my conversion and encounter with the movement. For sure, I am grateful for the opportunity to be here and experience the beauty of the meeting and of seeing many dear friends. And reflecting on these events again has been helpful for me. I hope it might be for you as well. I come from a very particular culture, the secular Jewish culture of New York City. If you have seen the movies of Woody Allen, or perhaps the television show Seinfeld, you have a general idea of the culture. Warmth, affection, humor, and interest in ideas, and in beauty in particular. This is a very alive, if also very neurotic, experience of life. My mother is a wonderful Jewish mother in many ways. She is warm and very attentive and anxious about her children. She wanted to communicate the value of family, and as well my sister, brother, and I were taught to be sensitive towards the suffering and the poor. My house was an art museum. There were prints of paintings from all the European masters and a few paintings of the Madonna. My mother believed that these paintings represented very beautiful expressions of the tenderness of motherhood. As my father worked until late, my sister and brother and I spent most of our time with my mother. I remember many deep discussions with her about every possible topic. Critical thinking is very important to her, as was having a good working knowledge of literature, music, art, current events, and all things beautiful. As the children grew older, my mother became a family therapist, where she is well renowned in this field. My father is quite a character. He is a psychiatrist, but with a relentless passion for movies, jazz, and comedy. A very generous spirit. His enthusiasm was infectious. If he saw a movie that he thought was funny, he would drag all his friends and their children to see it. I remember well this group of families laughing hysterically together in the city movie theaters at the latest Mel Brooks movie. He is a strong man, also with a deep love of beauty, but family was first. He is a real figure of a patriarch. My mother and father, aware of my passion for music, were able to encourage me to study music as well as playing blues and rock guitar. The music of Jimi Hendrix and Eric Clapton captivated me. I spent hours learning to play on guitar, note by note, almost all of their music. I began to study jazz, how to read music, and also classical harmony, counterpoint, and began to dabble in composition. We did not follow Moses or the great prophets. Most secular Jewish families had replaced these Jewish giants with new Jewish giants: Freud, Marx, Einstein, Gershwin, Bernstein. Here all the great categories of the heart were addressed: the need for truth, love, beauty, politics. Here there was an attempt at a total explanation of reality. However, I was lucky in that in my family, none of these worldviews were taken as total explanations of life. It was Jewish humor that expressed best the relationship with life in a healthy, ironic way. This point of view never sacrificed what was most human in us: our exalted greatness contradicted by our miserable faults and weaknesses. This saved my family from falling prey to dehumanizing ideologies. I would say Mel Brooks was our most revered rabbi. Nevertheless, leaving high school for college seemed a challenge for me. Leaving behind the security of my home with my family and friends, and the lack of answers to some deep, unarticulated questions about life and its meaning, all contributed to a growing, if unrecognized, anxiety. Was there no underlying and compelling certainty in life? The line from Hendrix's version of Dylan's classic, "All Along the Watchtower," expressed this unsettling intuition. and the wind began to howl. Remember that line? And how Hendrix does it? It's unbelievable. A wind that would threaten to blow away the solidity and happiness of my youth, leaving me no real firm handholds to grab onto. The first year in college was miserable, although I came to love classical music more. I remember one composition in particular by the American composer Charles Ives called The Unanswered Question. You can tell by the title, this gave a more explicit voice to the question at the depths of my heart. In that summer, I suffered a bleeding ulcer and almost died. During my recovery, I began to believe in God for some reason. I was amazed at what seemed being given a new chance at life. Eventually, I moved to New York City, and with my girlfriend at the time, to attend a classical music conservatory. The beauty of the art, music, architecture, literature, and history fascinated me. I sang a mass by Schubert. The conductor explained the meaning every moment of this work. I was moved to tears at its drama and beauty. This Christ, described in this music, and his life, expressed a mysterious dramatic content that spoke to my restlessness, my search, my sadness. I'm skipping many steps, but there are many steps before I arrive to this point. But here is where an impact with something else began to change me. My girlfriend and I broke up. For sure, I did not understand the meaning of love. I was more and more lost. But this education at conservatory to the beauty of the art produced in the womb of the church must have slowly been acting on my heart. I read My Name is Asher Lev by Chaim Potok. This book depicts a young Jewish artist who sees in the cross of Christ an adequate expression of human suffering that he could not find in his Jewish tradition. Years later, I would accompany Mr. Potok here. Unbelievable. Unbelievable. Finally, I read the strangest Gnostic Christian text and proclaimed the crucifixion as the central moment of the history of the universe. All the suffering I was undergoing was expressed on the face of that man. I also understood that all the suffering of my people in the Shoah, in the Holocaust, that unbelievable evil that my family couldn't ever think to Christianity for, in the face of that man on the cross, was answered. I don't know how I understood, but I understood. And I said in the room by myself, "You are the Messiah." I was by myself, alone in the apartment, and there was no one to hear but God. I had few friends to speak about this with. I in no way wanted to tell my family, no. I played at clubs around the city to make extra money. On the subway at all hours of the night, I would hear the booming voices of the preachers, "Repent or perish." It terrified me. Still, the evidence of Christ in the Catholic Church was more persuasive. There was always mercy more than judgment at its core. I was so in need of this mercy, of this being forgiven, with the tenderness and love of the face of that man on the cross. I walked into the church around the corner from my house. I heard the choir sing. I asked to join. And in 6 months, I became a Catholic. Now this becomes a story like in the Bible. I had to eventually tell my parents. And when I did, it was like a scene out of a movie. My mother was shocked. My dad was angered. And my sister, when they told her that I had converted, exclaimed, "What did he convert to? The metric system?" They had no idea. Converting to Catholicism was so outside my family's experience it seemed inconceivable. These were very painful and dark years for me. My parents' pain was an inconceivable pain for me as well. Though I learned to pray and beg to Jesus, Mary, and the saints, I missed human companionship so much. I missed the people. The event that had happened to me obsessed me. Yet the more I affirmed it, the more isolated I became. The division in my life between the spiritual and physical intensified my psychological problems, which was the blossoming of what was some kind of bipolar condition. The music business where I was working was becoming complicated as technology entered in. The company I worked at, David Horowitz Music, and you know David. David came here and we played, my whole office played many times here. In fact, David sends his greetings to everybody. At any rate, work was becoming challenging, very challenging. Lastly, all the romantic relationships only intensified the division I felt between the relentless memory of him and my human desires. I judged that the only thing of worth in my life was my faith. If I did not leave New York, I would lose it because of weakness. I knew I was having some kind of breakdown, but I was terrified to go to my parents or a secular doctor. In New York, I had no believing friends or family. There, in a sense, was no physical sign of his presence for me, outside of the Eucharist, in the church. For this reason, I took my 2 best guitars. I went to a shop, I said, they were worth thousands of dollars. I said, give me whatever. They gave me just enough money for a ticket to get on a plane. I impulsively flew to Rome. I needed to see where the church was. I needed to touch the church. When I arrived at the Vatican, I had not slept or eaten for weeks. But the sight of St. Peter was awesome. The huge, beautiful, holy structure put me at peace, at least for a minute. Here was Jesus' assurance for me. He had told St. Peter that against the structure, the gates of hell would not prevail. This was proof of the strength of God. It only remained for me to find this back home. What is amazing is that it found me. I still could not sleep or eat very well. So in desperation, I got on a bus and went a bus to Arizona to join a monastery where a Jewish friend of mine was. But my parents hired a private detective to find me. I left an easy trail. So the monastery refused my entry. I was like a homeless man at that point. And I remember just clutching the rosary. I don't know even how I learned about the rosary. And finally I broke down and I called my father. He flew out, being the patriarch, and we went home. At that point, my parents understood my faith had some kind of intense meaning for me. It was not just a rebellion. And we began to work things out. I was a destroyed person at that point. I couldn't work. I lived in my home. I didn't even want to think about women or music. But by God's grace, I ended up meeting a Catholic psychiatrist, and I told him my very dramatic story. And he said, "Oh, I know what you need. You need friends." And I knew he was right. And he sent me to a place where a little group of people were meeting at St. Patrick's Cathedral. Some are sitting here. And I think I dressed all in black, and I never smiled, and, you know, I had an attitude. And there were these young people talking about their faith, reading a book by a priest from Italy. And then we went to dinner at a Chinese restaurant. And there's significance there because all Jewish people every Sunday night eat at Chinese restaurants. So God was telling me something just by the Chinese restaurant. And all of a sudden, I was laughing and talking about the deepest. It went between talking about the deepest things of life, of faith, of beauty, of art, of God, of Jesus, of suffering, of pain, and laughing, eating. And I said, I recognize this. I recognize this. And I said, Jesus, this is you. And you put me through all this suffering of being alone, so my thirst was so big. And you are reproposing to me my Jewish faith as a Christian in these people. Because it was the same experience I had with my family. And I understood immediately the charism of Comunione e Liberazione, communion and liberation. Because without a people, I couldn't worship God. Or I could, but it didn't give me strength. It couldn't correct me. It couldn't embrace me. It couldn't walk with me. How do people go ahead without that? How? So the movement of the encounter of the movement was, I never, even though difficulties, friendships or go bad, human limitation, everything, all that stuff, that moment of encountering the movement was a judgment. And I clung to it with all my life, no matter what type of contradiction happened. And this place, my humanity became alive again. I began to work. I began to embrace my colleagues, and I met my wife. And we got married. And we have 3 children. In that period, it was very exciting. As my family was growing, also the movement was growing, and many people, many saints came to New York. Saints from Italy, saints from California, saints from Minnesota, everywhere. It was like Woodstock in New York, you know. We had music, we could play. Bay Ridge Band blew up in this, you know. It was creative. We had the choir of you know, the Bay Ridge Band. I don't know how we did so much, you know. The Way of the Cross began. 30 people. And this year, the first time, past the Freedom Tower. And then, anyway, and then many of us went to visit all over the country. And at times I felt like St. Paul, you know, this Jewish guy, you know, going to the Midwest. I mean, I know St. Paul felt like this, you know, trying to communicate the faith to people. I mean, there was no connection between Jewish people from New York and those people there. I mean, nothing, niente. And I ended up shooting guns with these guys. Not shooting at people, shooting. Yeah. So I've skipped everything. St. Paul, Jewish guy. Okay. Okay. My mom and dad. I get that. My mom and dad, my mother and father, couldn't believe the change. Also, they couldn't believe I got married. And now I was giving them the treasure of all Jewish parents, the treasure, grandchildren. My parents really began to love the movement and love the friends. They wanted to meet the people who are friends of mine and friends of my family and who help my family. And to this day, when we sit around the table, my mother can gossip about the life of the community. She wants to know all the gossip. I told you, it's the same. But it's very beautiful. It's very beautiful, and I think that I'll just end with what's happening now. I mean, it's beautiful to see my family sitting in my mother and father's kitchen with my children, speaking about all their experiences and their friends to them. And my parents see a great capacity in my children, and they're very happy for this, what they see. They're happy they go to GS vacation. They're happy they go to CLU vacation. My parents know this is helpful. The way it built my humanity is going to build their humanity. Now for Jews, and I think also Catholics, the idea that a people, the chosen people, you have to preserve it through what? The children. The passing down of tradition, of education through the children is of anxiety to a Jewish mother and father. Not for the success of their children, but for the preservation of the story of God in the world. And my parents are confident of this in my children. Even if they still don't believe in God, they see a movement in them, a humanity that can continue, that can contribute, that can build a human civilization. And I'll just end with my son, my second son, Peter, had a very hard year this year. He's 16, and so his desire, big. He's like my father in a way. He loves everything. He can't get enough of everything. But he also faced a lot of disappointment this year, a lot of disappointment. And then my father got sick with a heart problem. And Peter loves Papa. Peter loves Papa very much. And he wants to communicate his life, what he met to Papa. But he didn't think just drilling Christianity down his throat or Father Giussani was the method. So at an assembly we recently had, I wasn't there because I had to work, but I heard this tender, suffering passion of his heart. He laid bare before everyone of the community. And he recognized that his freedom was for him to love Jesus more, for him to love. And that there was no difference between his love of Jesus and his loving Papa. And I have a conclusion here, I guess. That's it. Is it okay? I'm amazed to be here and to see all of you who are my friends. When my psychiatrist said I needed friends, I didn't know I'd get so many.
Anujeet Sareen.
Grazie. I was born in 1972 in New Delhi, India, to a very traditional Sikh family. Sikhism is a small religion in India. It's only about 2% of the population, although 2% of 1 billion people is still a lot of people. The religion was created by these 10 prophets in India between 1400 and 1700 AD. And interestingly, the very first guru, is what we call the prophet, Guru Nanak, was actually originally a Hindu. And the start of this faith was really a response, actually, to his own Hindu tradition. And Sikhism today is not a sect of Hinduism. It's a completely separate religion. But at its origin, it was about a response to things that Guru Nanak saw in Hinduism that he didn't think were true. So he felt strongly that there was only one God, that the polytheism of the Hindu faith wasn't true. He rejected the worship of idols, and he also particularly rejected the caste system in India, which is a very big deal still today for the Sikh faith and the Indian communities. The religion, as the other prophets came, became more formalized, and another big part of the Sikh faith was there was a strong emphasis in living in community, and a rejection of Hindu monasticism. Now, I could tell you a lot more about Sikhism, but the particular custom that really affects my story in the Sikh faith that I just want you to know is the custom called Kesh. And that's the custom that does not allow a Sikh to ever cut his hair or her hair. And so for a Sikh boy, as he grows older and his hair grows longer, he wraps it around his head with a turban. And that turban is a very significant part of the identity of a Sikh. Unlike other parts of Asia or the Middle East, that turban is worn specifically for a religious reason. And there's more history to this. In the 1500s and 1600s, the Mughals invaded India, were trying to force everyone to convert to Islam. Now, you can't always tell the difference between a Hindu and a Muslim when you see them, but you know a Sikh when you see him. And there are many Sikhs who died or martyred because they refused to give up their faith. So it's a real source of pride for Sikhs. My parents moved to the United States when I was 4 years old. We moved to New York, and actually Brooklyn, although a different part of Brooklyn than Jonathan. And we were very involved in the Sikh community. We used to go to the religious services every Friday night for 2.5 hours. We'd then go again on Sunday. We'd start at 10 in the morning, go to 1 o'clock in the afternoon, and then we'd always have a shared meal together, so we wouldn't leave until 2:30. I went to Sikh youth camps, and we were really involved. And then in high school, probably like most teenagers, I began to question my faith. But you know, that questioning is particularly dramatic for a Sikh boy. You really need to know why you wear that turban. There's just no way to be a Sikh passively. It just isn't. Every time you step outside, you know that people are looking at you differently. Who are you? I asked a lot of questions of different Sikhs. In the end, I didn't get answers that I found satisfying. And so after I graduated from high school in 1989, I went up to see a friend in Massachusetts, which is about 6 hours from New York. And I went with him to a barber. And at the age of 16, I got the first haircut of my life. My hair was down to my thighs at the time, but it was in the turban. I went back to my friend's house, and I called my father at 11:30 at night. And I told him, and he didn't believe me. He asked to speak to my friend's mom, who really didn't know exactly what was going on. I felt badly for her, but she confirmed what had happened. He left New York a half an hour later at midnight. He drove 6 hours through the night to come pick me up. I was terrified. He got there, he looked at me, didn't say a word. We got back in that car, and we drove 6 hours straight back to New York. We went up to the apartment where we lived. My mom did not look at me for 3 days. That's really hard to do in an apartment. She didn't talk to me for 3 weeks. And you know, I felt very badly for them. I know what this is like. This was very painful for them, and every time they looked at me, they were reminded visually of that pain. And it was also in public display. I mean, the entire community could see that I had done this. The Sikh community, you know, has always been very supportive of them, but it was just really hard. And the other thing they were really upset about was they were concerned about my younger sisters. You see, my parents had an arranged marriage. And the way arranged marriages work is, you know, your family, your parents, look for another family for you. And how do you determine what's a respected family that you want to find a husband or a wife for your children? Well, you look at how they raise their children. And so they were worried that other families would look at us, look at me, and see what happened, and it would be much harder for them to arrange the marriages of my sisters. But you know, my parents are great. My dad just has such a huge heart. I mean, it was very painful at the time, but time would pass, and they love me as they always have. And I know my mom prays every day that I will return one day to Sikhism. But she loves me no less. You know, I went on to college that year, and my first year was pretty good, but it was strange. You know, it was the first time nobody looked at me twice. And, you know, it wasn't good or bad, it was just different. But, you know, by my second year, something was really bugging me. And I started searching, and I didn't know I was searching, but I was searching. You know, when you're young as a Sikh boy in America, even before maybe you can reason as well when you're older, you have to think about what this turban that you wear, what you carry, why it's more important than the teasing you get in school or the looks that you get everywhere you go. And I didn't realize it at the time, but leaving that faith, but not leaving for something else, was a problem. I mean, there was an emptiness in me that needed an answer. Even though, again, I wasn't fully aware of this, that's why I was searching. So I met some friends in college who were Catholic. They invited me to go to Mass, and I went, and I liked the Mass. I mean, Christ didn't mean anything to me, but I liked the readings. I liked the homily from Father David. I liked the Sign of Peace, actually, quite a bit. But I kept searching. I had a couple of very good friends who were Jewish. So I went to an Orthodox Jewish service at the school as well. And that was interesting. But it was all in Hebrew, so that didn't last very long. There were a lot of other things that happened that year, but one event in particular, a friend of mine, Michelle, who's here today, got a group together to go up to see the shrine in Attleboro, Massachusetts. And we drove to the shrine, and when we pulled into the parking lot, right before the lights were on, you know, it occurred to me that this was a really important place. That shrine isn't the most, beautiful shrine in the world, but there was something about the fact that this place came from a story that began a really long time ago, and that mattered. I didn't know exactly how it mattered, but I remember that there was a certain awe that I had in front of that history and that story. Now, more importantly, on that day, I met this very, very cute girl who was on that group, Tara, who would later become my wife. Tara and I saw each other through the rest of school. I continued to go to Mass on Sundays. You know, Christ didn't mean anything to me, but I liked going to Mass, and so I went. I graduated in 1993 in computer science, but I knew that I didn't want to be in front of a computer programming all day. So I got a job at a bank in New York in 93 for a few months, and then I moved up to Boston to be closer to Tara. And I got a job at an investment firm in Boston called Wellington. Wellington buys stocks and bonds around the world for its clients. And I specifically ended up working in the global bond group. So this is the group that's buying maybe Italian bonds, BTPs, or the bonds from the UK, gilts, US Treasury bonds, JGBs or Japanese bonds, and also investing in different currencies, therefore, around the world. And I found the work really, really fascinating. Tara and I would get married, and we'd have children very early. And in July 1998, our third child, Kailana, who's also here today, was born. Now, Kailana is a very, very lovely girl, but at the time when she was born, she was very, very colicky. She cried all the time. And she also came 13 months after her older sister, Kiran, and Kiran and her older brother, Adam, are also here. So, but 13 months is very close. And then also, in the summer of '98, there was a huge financial crisis in Asia, and that was my area of focus at work, so it was a very stressful time. And I remember turning to my wife, Tara, at the time and saying, look, we're done. No more kids. And if I had known the word at the time, I would have said basta with an exclamation point, okay, because that's how I felt. Now, as Providence would have it, Tara at the same time, right at that time, met this group of mothers who met weekly. It was a prayer group. They would do certain readings with Father Luca. And Tara, who'd always struggled, herself, whether she should stay home or get a career, over that next year really started to change. She became happier. She was more at peace at being at home with the kids, and it was really beautiful to see. And so she encouraged me to go to these meetings, these schools of community. There was one in Boston as well. We were raising our children Catholic. Tara's Catholic. We would attend Sunday Mass, but not much had changed for my faith since college. Christ still didn't mean anything to me, even though I was sympathetic to the Catholic faith. So I started going to these meetings. And the focus at the time was the book The Religious Sense by Father Giussani. And it was interesting. I liked how people talked about freedom. I liked how they talked about their faith and the way they described their experiences in life. And the other thing that happened that was surprising to me is I began to see that there was a connection between this work in the religious sense to what I do at work. See, I think I have the coolest job in the world. I mean, I get to sit sort of perched above the earth, okay, and watch and try to understand where money goes. Why? Why does money go from Rome to London to New York? Why does capital go from Frankfurt to Shanghai to Tokyo to Sydney? And to do this, to understand this, I need to understand the differences in culture and politics and history between countries. I need to understand how countries think about the problem of education and the value of work and money. I need to understand how they think about freedom, individual liberty, the role of government. And it became clear that, in fact, the way each person deals with their religious sense was very much at the core of this analysis. I get to see how the religious sense aggregates up to the national level and shape the economic future of countries. It's fascinating stuff. It was the first time that I saw a connection between my faith and work. And so meanwhile, I was meeting lots of new people in the church, and particularly in communion liberation. Father Vincent Nagel became a close friend and was very helpful for Tara and me in some of the struggles we had as husband and wife. I met Virginia, Christian, Paul, Jen, and many others in Boston. I met others from New York and D.C., Riro and Chris, Kaz, Valentina, Barry and Laura, John, Josephine, Maria Teresa, and particularly Jonathan. Who isn't moved by Jonathan's experience of faith? I was struck by the witnesses of their lives, by the remarkable way the mysteries seemed to move among them. And during that time, I also remember asking Father Vincent this question that had been bothering me about the church. I said, it just bothers me that the church claims that somehow it has the entire truth, more than any other faith. It is just such an arrogant position. And I knew Father Giussani talks about this in the Origin of the Christian Claim, but I hadn't really been immersed in that. I wasn't practicing Sikhism anymore, but I have such a huge respect for that faith. My parents are good people, and it's partly because of their faith. I knew many other Sikhs that who they were and the goodness in them came from this belonging. So I asked Father Vincent this question, and he answered the question, I think, in probably the best way possible. He didn't answer the question. He said to me, stay with what you've met. Stay with the people that you find helpful in your life. And see where this experience leads. And, at a certain level, it was a really annoying answer because he didn't answer the question. On the other hand, it was really a great answer. Because he was saying to me look, rather than trying to make everything fit together, stay with what your heart stay in front of this with your heart. The other thing that happened was that my life of prayer changed in a very unexpected way. I prayed regularly, not to Christ, but to God, for my wife, my children, my marriage. For some reason, the fact that the church sees marriage as a sacrament always made sense to me. Okay, my wife is different than me. She has a different freedom that's not mine, it's hers. The fact that I needed some other presence for that marriage made all the sense in the world, and so I prayed for it. But I never prayed for work. My work was the place where I exercised my talents, my capacity. If work didn't go well, I worked harder, or I worked differently. Okay? But it was about what I did. But of course, at some point, I did begin to struggle at work. In 2001, the stock market was crashing in the U.S. You had the 9/11 terrorist attack as well. And I really started to struggle. Look, and I'm an investor. When I say struggle, that's code word for my performance went down in my portfolios, okay? And I worked harder. I tried different things, but nothing was working. And it got to a point where finally I did begin to pray about work. And I also began to pray at work I remember walking through the halls of my company, praying the Hail Mary. And it occurred to me today, like, how beautiful that's the prayer that happened at that time. And it was a really big deal because, as dense as I may be, the mystery had found a way to make itself essential to every aspect of my life. I needed God for everything. And so by 2002, I did arrive to the point where Christ had become familiar. The faces that I had met and the experiences that I had, they had helped make the face of Christ familiar. And familiar in a way that was a new certainty in my life, not a reaching towards this mystery, but just aware that He's here. He's here with me now in these faces. On Pentecost in 2002, I was baptized in the Catholic Church. 3 weeks after I was baptized, Father Vincent introduced me to a couple who were in Boston on vacation from Singapore, Jasjit and Sarabjit. They were Sikhs who had converted to Catholicism, and I was stunned to meet them. You know, I'd never met a Sikh who had converted to any other faith, and since I met them, I've never met a Sikh who's converted to anything. And to meet them 3 weeks after I'd gotten baptized was an incredible grace for me. And it was really amazing. Jasjit connected me to another friend of hers in Singapore on email, and they helped me to see that the teachings of the Sikh gurus, the prayers that I had learned since a kid, were in fact beautiful expressions of the religious sense. That, in fact, the Sikh faith finds its fruition in Christ and the Church. Wow. I mean, this was a sensitive topic for me. You know, like I said, I have a big respect for that faith, and I have no interest in belittling it, but that was exactly my experience. You know, Sikhism has no connection to the Judeo-Christian tradition, but it is the path through which I met the Lord. I also thought the fact that I met this couple 3 weeks after I got baptized was also no coincidence. I mean, I was certain enough to get baptized, but I need these encounters to grow in that certainty. My son Neil Vincent was born in November of 2002. My daughter Mary Monica was born in March of 2005. And my daughter Julia Veronica was born in January of 2007. Work would get better for a few years. Then in 2006 and 2007, I started to struggle again. Again, code word for my performance went down. And I kept trying, kept working harder, trying different things. Nothing was working. But something was different this time. You know, as a portfolio manager, one of the first things you're taught is to diversify your investments, right? Any one investment I do isn't certain to perform. So you invest a small amount of money in a bunch of different investments. You diversify, okay? But what if I knew an investment was certain to perform well, right? Again, there's no such thing, but let's assume there was. Well, what I do? I'd put the whole portfolio, the entire portfolio of the client in that one investment. It's certain. I could tell them to put more money in that fund. I said, look, this is certain. Put everything in there. Go borrow money from your bank and put it in. And so this time, I had that certainty in my life. I had the certainty of Christ in my life, the promise for my destiny. And so I bet on it really, really hard. I mean, I prayed more, I prayed harder. I talked to the people in my life who are the faces of Christ for me. My wife, my friend Bob, my friend Jose, Father Jose. I talked to them about the difficulties I had at work, the problems I was facing. And look, it wasn't like, you know, praying more or praying harder that things changed. It wasn't that Tara and my friends came up with the answers to my problems. But what happened was that in that position of begging and the gaze that they had towards me, I began to look for the mystery again, more at work. To look for the one whose capacity always prevails over my limits, Christ. And slowly things began to change, but again in an unexpected way. I mean, it's always different. Performance started to get better in the beginning of 2008, and some of my relationships at work started to get better. But then the financial crisis hit in 2008. It didn't matter what happened to my performance. The whole industry was in trouble. In the spring of that year, Bear Stearns collapses, and all these other financial companies go bankrupt. It's Northern Rock, AIG, Washington Mutual, Lehman Brothers, and so on. my entire industry was really shaken. You know, at the time, I worked mostly on a trading desk. Now, if you've ever been on a trading desk, or if you watch a movie on a trading desk, right, it's noisy, it's loud. Nobody talks about anything serious. Right? You talk about who won the football game last night, or the basketball game. You talk about maybe some rumors or news. Maybe you talk a little bit about politics, but nothing deep. Okay? But something really interesting, remarkable happened back then. The volatility in the markets opened a question I'd never seen open on the trading desk. What was the source of our certainty? With all these companies collapsing, everyone wondered how many more companies would go bankrupt, whether it would be ours. And so that question was open. And I remember talking to some colleagues on the trading desk, right, and saying, this is why I'm a Catholic. If God walks with me now, then there's nothing in this financial storm, okay, that can shatter the certainty of that promise. This is my experience. I was stunned that I could say this. I mean, I would never have imagined that I could say this. And I also realized that the difficulties I had had those previous 2 years was so that I would be in a position to say something like this. In the spring of 2009, the markets were bottoming, and there was a guy named Brian who approached me at work. Now, I'd hired Brian in my group a couple of years earlier. Brian said, can I talk to you about something? So we went out and took a walk, and he said to me, why are you a Catholic? Okay, it's a big question. Now, I knew a little bit about Brian's history. Brian grew up, he also grew up in Brooklyn, although I didn't know him. He grew up a Catholic, went to Catholic grammar school, went to Catholic high school, went to Catholic college. He'd work in New York City and go to daily mass. He married his wife, who's Catholic in the Catholic Church. And they moved up to Boston, and the whole pedophilia scandal happened, and they left the church. They had a daughter who wasn't baptized. And so he was asking me this question. And at first, I said, look, Brian, you talk really actually quite affectionately about the priests who taught you in high school. Why don't you ask them that question? And he goes, look, I could. And he says, and I might, but you're here, and you didn't have to be a part of the system. So, we started talking, and I told him about my experiences, how my life had changed and continued to change. But, I was just so floored by this. Brian grew up 10 minutes away from me in Brooklyn. He grows up Catholic, I grew up as a Sikh. We don't meet until 20 years later. He's left the church and I've joined the church. I hire him a year before that financial crisis, okay? And that crisis opens up this question again of certainty that he thought he had shut, he had closed a few years before. And God puts me in that place at that time so that he can ask that question of me. Wow. Wow. Not coincidence. We would start talking, we had many conversations, and in 2010, the Pope Benedict came under criticism for the time that he was the bishop in Munich, right? Again, related to some of the pedophilia scandals. And then Brian got all upset again and started talking to me, and I said, look, here's this flyer that Father Caron and Community Liberation have put out. It's a beautiful flyer, and we're going to talk about it at our School of Community. You're welcome to join. So he decided he would come. And I said to Brian, I just want to warn you, though, we're going to start with a prayer, we're going to sing a couple of songs, and then we're going to talk. He said, fine. And he came, and he prayed with us, and then he sang with us, and it was fantastic. I don't know about any of you, but it's really hard to sing angry. It's really hard. And, his jaws clenched, but he's singing, and it just sort of started to just soften, and he started to sing. It was really beautiful. And we talked about the flyer, and he came up to me after, and he said, this was really helpful. Thank you, to know, to be reminded that it's his church. It's Christ's church. It's not ours. That makes all the difference in the world. Wow, fantastic. So then the following year, though, I got distracted. My kids, my work, all this stuff, and we just didn't talk very much. And then Holy Week rolled around in 2011, and like Holy Saturday, I was thinking, I'm just such a putz, to use a Yiddish expression. I'm not a good friend. I should be checking in with him, seeing what's going on in his life. And he calls me. I'm driving, with 5 kids in the car, going up to pick up some desserts for Easter. He calls me on my phone, and he goes, can I talk to you for a minute? And I said, sure. He said, listen, I just want to tell you, I just got a confession. the first confession I've been to in over 10 years. I don't know if you realize, but you've been such an important part of me returning to the church. I just wanted to thank you. I was just floored. I mean, I was just so floored. Despite my distraction, my lack of attentiveness towards Brian, the mystery yet moved through me. I mean, that call was such a gift to me. I mean, God was reminding me once again that my incapacity does not limit what he can accomplish. And it was also just a way for God to remind me that my destiny lies squarely in his hands. I was in this job, in this company for a reason, and even if it's not always apparent to me why, rest assured that God's promise for my destiny was never in doubt. And it was a remarkable experience for me to know that no matter what happened after that point at work, my time there had served very deliberately God's purpose. And look, it's not to say that there weren't many other things that happened before and after that certainly served God's purpose. But that particular event made that fact very crystal clear for me. It was pure grace. You know, a friend of mine, Vincent, he's not Father Vincent, another Vincent, once said to me, how do you know that it's Christ who transforms these difficulties at work? Yeah, your performance goes down, you start praying, you start thinking about Christ, and your performance gets better, and you're fine. Is that really about Christ, or are you just pasting him on your circumstances? I love that question. And the way I know that that's not what I'm doing, that it is Christ who's there, is that I grow in the experience of wonder. You know, I don't know about you, I can't fabricate wonder. I can't force myself to feel wonder. And when I grow in wonder, I know the mystery is present. All my measures collapse in wonder. You know, I've been in my industry for 20 years, and I'm more fascinated today than when I started. You know, I could tell you about all kinds of examples, but I was doing research in the Brazilian currency last year, the Brazilian real, again recently on the Norwegian krona. And I get very into it, and I'm a total financial geek, okay? I get so into it, and I'm excited. I get to the point where I understand that currency, right? And I'm super excited. And that, for me, is awe. That's wonder. I mean, before I know whether we're going to make money on it or not, I love that. I love understanding something about reality in this way. The most recent example of wonder for me, so the last example, has been evident in the way I've had to do research on economics and politics in recent years. You know, investors, they don't like to think about politics. It makes our lives a lot messier, okay? But since 2008, it's become a lot more important. There's some serious issues, right, as we hear in Rimini this week as well, where public policy matters. And so I've been doing more research on this, and in a surprising way, it's led me to the social doctrine of the church. And now I find myself, I have conversations at work with people who are PhD-trained economists from Harvard, secular people, anti-church, anti-Catholic people. But we care about the same problem. How do we think about the economy? What do we do? And what the church has to say on subsidiarity and solidarity has bearing. And so I talk about it. Not because I'm trying to convince them of anything of the faith, but it's relevant. And I'm stunned by this. I mean, if you had said to me 4 years ago, 5 years ago, you know, you're going to talk about the social doctrine of the church at a financial firm, I'd have said, you're crazy. But I can't help but talk about this now. And I think I'm just amazed that that's possible. My son, Alexander Michael, was born in August 2010. And my son, Matthew James, was born in November of 2011. God has graced me with 8 children, 4 boys and 4 girls. And clearly, God's definition of basta is very different from mine. You know, I've talked mostly about my work and very little about my wife and children. And all the signs of Christ's impact on my life, the greater wonder, the greater desire for life, the greater experience of freedom, they're all very dramatically evident in my marriage and in my children. But today, the reason I focused on my experiences at work, it's because it's there that I expect to see Christ the least. It's there that I begin to think that life is about my capacity, my mind, and my hands. And so it's there that I'm most often surprised to see his face. Grazie.
Ringrazio i nostri ospiti per come ci hanno testimoniato in modo
Thank you very, very much for your two testimonies. Extremely moving, extremely interesting, testifying to the fact that we can have a new life whenever we encounter Christ and when Christ becomes the most important person in our life. Thanks to... Otherwise, I couldn't have possibly walked. They recognized that God had priority in their life, and they decided to follow him. So the meaning of a testimony in the adventures of life, from the sad ones to the joyful ones, it's a disruption. It's something. It's a major overhaul in your life that is related to the encounter with God. Thank you very much to our two guests from the United States. Please do not forget to sign the appeal to defend the Christians in Egypt and enjoy the rest of the day. Thank you.
Brooklyn is in the house. Great. Awesome. Thank you. Thank you very much.